Hey guys, so today I want to talk about grains. Whole grains are better than the grains that you oftentimes find in supermarkets because they are not processed. They still contain the natural oil in their outer layer, and the milling process of other grains removes things like the B vitamins and most of their nutrients, making them a less nutritious food. So when you go shopping for grains, you definitely want to go for those that have not been processed. And the reason why they are processed is to give them a much longer shelf life. So obviously we can see that grains are produced today most commonly for industrial purposes to help businesses make a profit. And we don't want that. When you're trying to increase your health, you want to get things that are as close to nature as possible. And also when grains are milled, they contain a small amount of natural oil in their outer layer, like I mentioned, and the oils can go rancid by the process of oxidation. So exposing the whole grains to light, air, and heat will cause them to go rancid. And when they are processed, a lot of times they are exposed to these things more prevalently than are the whole grains. So I want to talk a little bit about how to store your grains. I recommend that if you can, get a heat sealer and Mylar bags off the internet. That's probably the most preferred way. That's how we like to store ours. So we buy our grains in bulk, and then we store them in Mylar. And you can get little oxygen absorbers as well that you can put in the Mylar bags, and then the heat sealer, and that will take the oxygen right out. And you can store them, and what I have learned from people that have trained me is that whole grains that are not milled into flour can be stored for 20 to 30 years and still be usable if stored in the proper conditions. So in other words, a cool place, probably dark, even though Mylar is supposed to weed out the light. And then if you mill your own flours, which I don't recommend doing previously, but if you happen to get the grain and you mill them and then you put them in Mylar, they are supposed to be good for about 10 to 15 years. So Mylar is an excellent way to store your grains. You can also put them in a pantry, hopefully a darkened place, in glass jars. Jars that have a sealer on the top are preferable. And you definitely don't want to store them in bags because little grain moths, they love that. They can sense that, they can smell it, and they will chew holes through your bags, and then you can get an infestation of worms in your house, and that happened to us once, so we learned our lesson for sure. You can also store your grains by purchasing buckets that are food grade, and the Gamma Seal buckets are really good. You can get those from Pleasant Hill Grains, and that they teach you all about how to put them in the bucket and then store them, and it comes with a little wrench that when you want to use your grain you can open the bucket with the wrench. So that's a really good way to also long-term store it. You just want to make sure that they're stored in airtight containers, and you can use anything really, mason jars, old mayonnaise jars, any other glass jars that you have, and that will help to extend your grains. Now what about if you blend your grains, if you grind them? If you grind them and you still have a little bit of flour left over, I recommend putting them in a container in the fridge, and they will be good for a little while, although not hugely long after that. But maybe like if you use it within a week or so, you'll still retain some of the vitamins and minerals. Now what about buying grains in bulk? We definitely do this because first of all it saves money, and then you can choose where you're buying your grains from. And my family prefers to get them from a place called Rainy Day Foods, rainydayfoods.com. They're a division of Walton Feed, and if you look on their site or call them up, you can actually get grains that are listed as natural. What a lot of farms will do is they will sell grains that are natural, quote unquote, when they haven't been able to go through the expensive process of becoming organic. So if you're okay with the natural label, that oftentimes means that the grains are in very good, grown from nature conditions, oftentimes not use pesticides, they're just natural. And so look for that if you can't find organic. So that's a great thing. If you go to a regular store and you try to buy in bulk, you are going to probably be paying more retail prices. And then, grains that are stored in bulk bins, they do have a little bit higher risk of going rancid or becoming infested with bugs, just because you know, the lids are opened frequently and they're transferred and they change hands a few times. So that would be something to keep in mind with them. Some people have asked, well, what about like whole grain cereals and that sort of thing? We don't really recommend cereals, or I don't really recommend cereals a whole lot that are puffed grains, because the process of puffing uses extremely high temperatures that destroy most of the nutrients and then cause those natural oils to become rancid. And a lot of people don't realize this, and they will go for cereals that are, you know, like Kashi brand or all of the organic, natural, you know, whatever the brands are. And most, if not all of those places, use this same kind of puffing process to create their cereal, which actually takes out some of the nutrients and perverts other parts of the nutrients. So if you like cereal, you know, oatmeal is a good way to go, or you can get Ezekiel Bread brand makes a kind, I think that's like a cinnamon, and it's a sprouted cereal. You can go for things like that. That's what I would recommend. Now, if you want a snack here and there, if you want a treat, you know, from time to time, and you want to have a regular cereal, then, you know, that is a choice that you can make. But I just wanted to share with you guys about cereal. So, you are really better off left with leftover whole grains made into a soft porridge and oatmeal, that kind of thing. And you can get a lot of hot cereals too that are pretty nice. I think Red Mill brand, Bob's, you can get that at like the department stores sometimes, but they have hot cereals, you know, 8-grain cereals that are really nice. Now, what about, sometimes I get asked a question about instant or parboiled rice, that kind of thing. Even the long grain brown rice, that's parboiled. And what happens with parboiled is that it has already been fully cooked and then dried. So it may seem like a good option, but I really suggest avoiding that and just going for the whole grain brown rice, long grain brown rice. You can get the wild rices, and just go home and soak them overnight, and then the next day, you know, use them by boiling them on a medium to low temperature for about 20-30 minutes, depending on how you like your consistency of rice. And make sure to drain off any foam from the top, and that will help your rice to be as digestible as possible. And that really goes for a lot of grains too. So you can really benefit from whole grains, and there are definitely different kinds of whole grains that you can try, ranging from rice, brown rice, to millet, to quinoa, to amaranth, to, you know, some of the others. But some people have what they think is a gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity, and if you feel that you do have that and you're working through your health issues, you might want to steer clear of the high gluten grains, and those are wheat, spelt, kemet, barley, rye, and triticale. I'm not sure how to say that one. Triticale, which is a rye and wheat blend. So if you are wanting the lower or no gluten grains, you want to go for quinoa, rice, oats, wild rice, buckwheat, millet, amaranth, teff, and corn, but make sure that the corn is organic and GMO free, because most of the corn that's produced in this country and some other parts of the world is GMO. So, what about soaking the grains? Well, we recommend soaking grains before cooking them, and that is because grains have phytic acid. And the phytic acid is found within the hulls of nuts, seeds, beans, and grains. And it's known as a chelator, which means that it binds with minerals like zinc, magnesium, calcium, and iron. And it can make it really hard for them to be absorbed. So in large quantities, phytic acid can be a real problem. And it can lead people to having mineral deficiencies if they're eating a lot of grains and it's binding with the with those minerals. And then what your body does is it takes from other reserves and stores of minerals to complete what it needs. So we don't want to do that. So what you can do to reduce the phytic acid is to soak it overnight, and that can help. So it breaks down the phytic acid, and then when you cook it the next day, not only does it seem to take less time to cook the grain, but then you have a more nutritious grain where
more of the nutrients that you're bringing into your body are actually kept by your body. So use time on, to work for you. Instead of soaking during the day, which you can do if you go to work, soak it overnight, because then you get like an automatic 8 to 10 hours or whatnot, and then it's ready for you the next day. Now if you want a grain that's not going to be mushy when you eat it, you probably don't want to soak it, and this would be purely a probably aesthetic quality to the grain. But if you want a firmer grain, then cook it the day that you're going to use it. And then also, like oatmeal, I've noticed is an example of how you can change the consistency of it when it's cooked. Like if you want a more firm oatmeal, don't soak it, but if you want sort of a more mushy, creamy oatmeal, definitely soak it. So that's sort of another consideration to keep in mind when you are soaking your grains. So I do want to mention though that phytic acid does have some benefits, and it can prevent the overmineralization of joints, blood vessels, and other parts of the body. So I really tell people, have a balance. Soak your grains when you can, but if you can't, just make sure to get the best quality you can and cook them as normal, and then just skim off anything that comes to the top. Like for instance, quinoa, when you boil it, you'll see sort of this like film on the top of the pan, sort of like a foam. It looks sort of like a brown meringue. It's not very much, but you want to just skim that off, because that supposedly is the saponin that is hard to digest, and it's sort of like a waste product, so you want to just skim that off. So yeah, like I mentioned, it's good to just keep everything in balance, and you can pre-soak seeds and nuts as well as grains, and that works very well for them. That's part of the process called sprouting, and we'll get into that in another video. But thanks for listening, and we will get into more on grains later.